I never thought a dumb mirror selfie in the gym locker room would be the thing that got me completely twisted up about someone, but here we are. So picture this. I'm halfway through my usual Monday evening workout, head down, just trying to burn off the weekend's pizza sins, when I walk into the locker room to grab a towel and bam! There's this guy standing right in front of the big mirror, phone in hand, taking selfie after selfie like he's auditioning for some fitness magazine cover. Now, I usually don't pay much attention to people doing mirror selfies. Kind of a cliche, right? But there was something about this guy that made me pause mid-step. First off, he had this relaxed confidence. Not the annoying, look at me type of confidence, but more like he was completely comfortable in his own skin, which honestly is kind of rare to see when you're just trying to get through a grueling workout. He wasn't one of those overly shredded dudes plastered with gym gear logos either. Just a regular guy wearing a simple black tank top and sneakers, casually snapping pictures of himself like it was no big deal. I caught a glimpse of his face in the mirror, dark, slightly messy hair, a sharp jawline that could have been carved by a sculptor, and these eyes that looked like they were holding back a smirk, or maybe a secret joke. For some reason, it hit me that he might actually be a little shy about all the mirror selfies he was taking. Like, I don't know, maybe he was just trying to see if he looked decent after his workout. Or maybe he was waiting for someone to come in and laugh at how seriously he was taking his mirror game. And here's the thing, I probably could have just grabbed my towel and left, but instead, I found myself watching him for longer than I intended. It felt oddly comforting, standing there in the middle of this usually noisy, sweaty locker room, watching this small, quiet moment of someone just being himself. I didn't even realize I was holding the door a little too long until he caught me staring and looked up, eyes meeting mine in the mirror. For a second, it was like time slowed down, and I had zero idea what to say or do. Instead of awkwardly looking away, he smiled. Just a small, genuine smile that made my heart do this stupid little flutter I didn't expect. So yeah, that was the moment it all started. Just a guy taking mirror selfies in the gym locker room and me pretending I wasn't completely interested. Little did I know, that night was going to be way more than just a casual workout. But I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. Because the best part? It wasn't just the selfies that caught my attention, it was everything that unfolded after. For a second, all I could do was stand there with my mouth probably hanging open like an idiot. I'm usually way better at casual small talk, but when this guy smiled at me like that, I totally blanked. Finally, I managed a half smile back and cleared my throat like I was suddenly very interested in the floor tiles. Hey? I said, because apparently that was the best opener my brain could come up with. He laughed softly, still holding his phone, and said, Hey, didn't mean to catch you off guard with a mere photo session. His voice was low and a little rough, but not in a gruff way, more like someone who's just a little amused by himself. I shrugged, trying to play it cool even though my heart was doing somersaults. No worries, just didn't expect to see someone else taking so many selfies in here. Usually, it's just me trying to avoid eye contact. He grinned. Yeah, I guess mirror selfies in the locker room are kind of a weird flex. I'm Jake, by the way. Dan, I said, finally managing to introduce myself without sounding like a complete dork. We both stood there awkwardly for a beat, and then Jake gestured toward the bench nearby, still holding his phone but clearly ready to put it away. So Dan, what are you working on today? I'm trying to get better at deadlifts, but my form is all over the place. I felt myself relax a little. Talking about workouts was my comfort zone, something I could riff on for hours without feeling awkward. Deadlifts, huh? Yeah, that shit's tricky. I'm actually focusing on squats this week, trying to finally add some weight without face planting. Jake nodded, clearly interested, and we slipped into this easy rhythm talking about gym routines, favorite exercises, and the usual gripes about crowded benches and sticky water fountains. It was weird how natural it felt, considering I didn't even know this guy 5 minutes ago. After a while, he tossed his phone into his locker and said, You know, I usually don't chat with people in the locker room. Feels kind of weird, like breaking some unspoken rule. But you seem chill. I laughed. Yeah, me too. This place is usually just a pit stop between sweat and shower, but I'm glad you broke the ice. He grinned again, and I noticed this little dimple that made his smile even more contagious. So Dan, you come here often? Classic question, but somehow it didn't sound cliche coming from him. Yeah, about 3 times a week. It's kind of my escape after work. What about you? Same. I'm usually here in the evenings. Seems like we're on similar schedules. He glanced around, then lowered his voice a bit. Honestly, I come more for the vibe than the gains. The gym's kind of my social experiment, seeing who's actually friendly beyond the grunts and flexing. I got that. I'm not exactly Mr. Social Butterfly, but I do enjoy catching small moments with people here and there. It's like a secret community if you look close enough. Maybe we should team up sometime, I teased, feeling bolder now. I could use a deadlift partner who doesn't judge my form. Jake's eyes lit up and he leaned in like he was about to share a secret. Deal, but only if you promise not to laugh when I struggle with pull-ups. I'm a disaster. I laughed, genuinely happy. You have a deal. Just then, the door to the locker room creaked open and a couple of guys filed in, breaking the bubble of our little conversation. Jake looked at me, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face, and then shrugged. I should probably finish getting ready. But hey, this was nice. Yeah, really nice, I said, feeling like I was already counting down until next time. We exchanged numbers before parting ways, and as I walked out, I couldn't help but replay the whole interaction in my head. It felt rare, like finding a tiny beacon of something good in the middle of the usual chaos. The next few days, I caught myself checking my phone more than usual, waiting for a text from Jake. And when it finally came, it was just as casual and easy as our first talk. Ready to make a deadlift disaster into a masterpiece? I grinned at my screen and typed back, "Let's do this." That's how it started. An unremarkable Monday evening that turned into something I didn't even know I was looking for. And honestly, I can't wait to see where this goes. Because sometimes, the smallest things, like a guy taking mirror selfies in the locker room, can turn out to be the biggest surprises. Our first workout together was almost laughably awkward. We met up the following Thursday evening, same time, same gym, and right away, I could tell Jake was a little nervous. Not in a scared of me way, but more like he was self-conscious about having a gym buddy. I get it. Working out is personal. Some days, you just want to be left alone with the dumbbells. But honestly, having someone else there made it feel less like a chore and more like a hangout. We started off with some warm-up sets, and Jake immediately asked me to watch his deadlift form. I tried to offer tips, but I'm no expert. Just a guy who spent too much time watching YouTube tutorials and trying not to hurt himself. We ended up laughing a lot, mostly at how we both kept fumbling through the exercises, dropping weights, and making weird faces when something felt off. At one point, Jake made this breathless joke about how we should probably stick to dumbbells before we embarrass ourselves in front of the row of serious lifters nearby. I nodded, grateful for the levity. It was nice to be around someone who didn't take the gym drama seriously. Halfway through, as we were taking a break, Jake wiped sweat from his forehead and said, I wasn't sure about meeting up like this. I thought it'd be weird, but it's actually kind of fun. I smiled, feeling the same way. Yeah, same. It's way better than just slogging through reps alone. We ended up chatting more during rest periods, random stuff about music, movies, and the usual "what do you do when you're not here" questions. Turns out, Jake works in graphic design, and he's got this quirky sense of humor that I found myself wanting to hear more of. By the time we wrapped up, I was already looking forward to the next session. But what caught me off guard was how easily the conversation flowed. It wasn't forced or awkward. It felt like I had known him longer than a week. After that workout, we started texting more, not just about gym stuff, but about everyday nonsense. Like that time he sent me a picture of his dog wearing a ridiculous sweater, and I replied with a meme that had him laughing for minutes. It was nice, this growing connection that didn't feel rushed or desperate. One evening, a few days after our second workout, Jake messaged me out of the blue. Hey, want to grab coffee after work tomorrow? Not gym-related, I promise. I almost spilled my drink reading that. I typed back, trying to sound casual, yeah, I'd like that. So we met at this little cafe near the gym, the kind with exposed brick walls and way too many plants. Jake was already there when I arrived, nursing a cappuccino and scrolling through his phone. He looked up and smiled that same smile that had me hooked the first time I saw him. Sitting across from him, I realized how easy it was to just be myself. We talked about everything and nothing. Jobs, family, the ridiculousness of online dating, and our mutual love for terrible reality TV shows. The conversation was effortless, and time flew by. At one point, Jake reached across the table and lightly brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. "You're cute when you're distracted," he said softly. My heart did that idiotic flutter again. "You're pretty charming yourself." There was this brief pause, like the world held its breath, and I wondered if he felt the same weird mix of excitement and nerves I was feeling. Later, as we walked back toward the gym parking lot, I finally asked the question that had been buzzing in my mind for days. "So what made you start taking all those mirror selfies in the locker room that first night?" Jake chuckled, clearly prepared for that one. "Honestly, I was trying to see if all the workouts were paying off. Plus, I'm terrible at taking regular photos, so the mirror was the easiest option." I smiled, feeling even more connected to him because it was such a simple, honest answer. He looked down at his phone, then back up at me. "But I guess I never expected that to be the moment I'd meet someone like you." I stopped walking, heart pounding. "Me neither." He stepped closer, just a little, and for the first time, I noticed the subtle scent of his cologne, a mix of something fresh and a little woodsy. "Maybe we should stop pretending the gym's just about fitness," he said quietly. "Maybe it's about finding people who get you." I nodded, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, I think you might be onto something." That night, as I lay in bed replaying everything, I realized that sometimes the smallest moments, like a guy taking mirror selfies in a locker room, can lead to the most unexpected beginnings. And I was ready for whatever came next. After that night, things started to shift between Jake and me in this slow, almost imperceptible way that made every text and every glance feel a little heavier, like there was something unspoken pulsing just beneath the surface. We kept working out together, sure, but now our conversation stretched past the usual gym talk. We talked about what we wanted, what scared us, the little cracks we usually keep hidden. One evening, a couple of weeks after that coffee date, we found ourselves back in the locker room. It was quieter than usual. Most people had cleared out, leaving just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint scent of sweat and shampoo. Jake was fiddling with his phone again, but this time, instead of taking a mirror selfie, he was scrolling through photos. "Look at this," he said, holding his phone up to the mirror, showing me a picture of a mountain trail. The sun was setting behind a ridge, casting golden light across the trees. "I went hiking over the weekend. Needed to get out of the city for a bit." I nodded, trying to sound interested, but honestly, I was distracted by the way his eyes lit up when he talked about it. "You're into hiking?" I wouldn't have guessed. He shrugged, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "It's kind of my escape." The gym's a different kind of escape, but out there, it's quiet. No expectations. No pressure to look a certain way. I thought about that, about how the gym could sometimes feel like a stage where everyone was performing for themselves or for others. I get that. Sometimes I come here to prove something to myself, but other times, it's exhausting trying to keep up appearances. Jake gave a slow smile, like I'd just said something he'd been thinking but hadn't voiced. Exactly. There was a pause, and then he glanced at me sideways. "So Dan, can I ask you something a little personal?" I raised an eyebrow, feeling my pulse quicken. "Shoot." He hesitated, then said quietly, "What are you looking for? I mean, with all this, us, the workouts, the texts, where do you see this going?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't really thought about it in words yet. I liked Jake more than just a workout buddy or a casual friend. But was I ready to admit that out loud? Could I even say it to myself? I met his gaze in the mirror and shrugged, trying to sound casual. "I guess I'm just taking it one day at a time. But honestly, I'm hoping it's something real, something worth holding on to." He smiled, and it was like a weight lifted between us. "Me too." That night, as I changed out of my workout clothes, I caught myself glancing back at the mirror where our reflections had just overlapped. It felt like more than just a coincidence that we'd met the way we did. Two guys, a phone, and a mirror in a noisy locker room. The next few weeks were a mix of workouts, texts, and coffee dates, sprinkled with quiet moments where we just sat together, no pressure, no expectations. One night, after a particularly brutal leg day, Jake and I found ourselves sitting on a bench outside the gym, the cool night air soothing our sore muscles. We talked about everything from childhood memories to embarrassing first dates. When the conversation lulled, Jake turned to me and said softly, "You know, I've never really done this before. Like, met someone and felt like maybe there could be more." I looked at him, heart pounding. "Yeah? Me neither." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Jake reached out and took my hand. His fingers were warm and steady, and I felt like I was finally home. That simple touch changed everything. It was the start of something neither of us had expected, but both wanted. Over the next few months, Jake and I became inseparable. We kept working out together, but the gym was no longer just a place to sweat. It was where we started building something real. We found joy in the small things, sharing playlists during warm-ups, trying new coffee spots after workouts, and stealing quiet moments in the locker room mirror where it all began. One night, standing in front of that same locker room mirror, Jake smiled at me and said, "Remember when I was just the guy taking mirror selfies?" I laughed. How could I forget? It's the best accidental thing that ever happened. He reached up and took my hand again, and I knew that no matter where life took us, we'd always have that moment. A simple selfie, a shared smile, and a beginning neither of us saw coming. Things between Jake and me kept unfolding in ways I hadn't really expected. We slipped into this easy rhythm, like two puzzle pieces that just fit, but with enough edges to keep things interesting. The gym remained our meeting point, but gradually, the rest of the world started to sneak into our conversations and plans. One Saturday, maybe a month after that moment in the locker room mirror, Jake texted me super early, like way earlier than any reasonable person should be up on a weekend. "Hiking trip, 8 a.m. You in?" My first thought was, is this a joke? But knowing Jake, this was probably serious. So I replied with a mix of enthusiasm and sarcasm. "Are you trying to kill me or just torture my weekend plans?" He shot back immediately. "Nature tortures the soul in the best way. Come on, man." I couldn't say no. We met up at some trailhead just outside the city, the air crisp and fresh, completely different from the recycled gym atmosphere we were used to. The hike was tougher than I expected, but Jake was patient, matching my pace and making jokes when I was about to keel over. At one point, we stopped on this rocky outcrop overlooking a valley dotted with trees, just starting to turn gold and red. Jake pulled out his phone and, to my surprise, started taking pictures. Not selfies this time, but of the view. And then a few candid shots of me pretending I wasn't sweaty and exhausted. "Hey," I said, nudging him. "No more mirror selfies," he laughed. "This is better. Way better." We sat there for a while, just taking in the silence and the cool breeze. I realized then how rare it was to find someone who could be both your workout buddy and your quiet companion. Someone who made the world feel a little less noisy. After the hike, we grabbed lunch at a tiny diner nearby. Over greasy burgers and 2 sweet milkshakes, we talked about everything from childhood dreams to what we wanted out of life. Jake admitted he'd always been a bit guarded, afraid to let people in, especially after some bad experiences. I shared some of my own scars, the kind you don't see in a gym mirror. It was the kind of talk that felt risky but right, like we were both peeling back layers we'd kept hidden for too long. A week later, things took another step. Jake invited me over to his place after our workout. I wasn't sure what to expect, honestly. We'd spent so much time together in public spaces that being somewhere private felt like uncharted territory. His apartment was cozy and lived in, filled with art supplies, books, and this incredible collection of vinyl records. We ended up sprawled on the couch, one of Jake's old records playing softly in the background. I watched him as he flipped through an art book, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, and I felt something in my chest tighten. He looked up and caught me staring. "Stop it," he teased, nudging me gently. "I'm not," I lied, grinning. We talked late into the night, sharing stories and jokes until the space between us started to shrink. When our hands finally touched, it felt completely natural, like we'd been moving toward this moment since the day we met in that locker room. Our first kiss was tentative but electric, a quiet promise that maybe we could be more than just gym partners or casual friends. Over the following months, our relationship deepened. We navigated the usual stuff, meeting friends, figuring out schedules, dealing with the occasional insecurity. But we also built something solid, a foundation that wasn't just about attraction, but about real connection. One rainy evening, we found ourselves back in the locker room after a tough session. The mirrors fogged up from the steam of the showers, and the room felt empty except for us. Jake caught my eye in the mirror and smiled that dimpled grin. "You remember that first night?" he asked. "How could I forget? You and your mirror selfie marathon." He laughed, then reached out to squeeze my hand. "I'm glad you didn't just walk away." "Me too," I said softly. Standing there, with the sound of dripping water and the faint scent of shampoo, it hit me how unexpected and perfect this journey had been. From a simple selfie to something that felt like home. I squeezed his hand back, knowing this was only the beginning. That night in the locker room, as the fogged mirror blurred our reflections, I felt this strange mix of comfort and nervous excitement settle in my chest. It was like all the usual distractions. The sweat, the noise, the routine had melted away, leaving just Jake and me standing there, hand in hand, in a quiet bubble that felt miles away from the rest of the world. We didn't say much after that, just lingered, soaking in the moment. Eventually, Jake pulled me closer, resting his forehead against mine. His breath was warm, and in that simple gesture, I felt 1,000 unspoken things: trust, hope, and this quiet promise that we were in this together, no matter what came next. After that night, things between us deepened in a way I hadn't quite anticipated. Workouts turned into dinners, dinners into lazy Sundays spent binge-watching shows, and suddenly, I found myself sharing parts of my life I'd never brought up with anyone else. One evening, a couple of weeks later, Jake invited me over for dinner. I showed up with a bottle of wine and a nervous grin, wondering if I was making too big a deal out of it. But as soon as I stepped into his apartment, the nervousness melted away. The place smelled like fresh basil and garlic, and the soft glow of string lights gave the room this warm, inviting feel. Jake was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with his usual focused expression, but when he saw me, his face lit up. "Hey, you made it! Wouldn't miss it," I said, setting the wine down on the counter. "We cooked together. Well, mostly Jake did, and I tried not to mess up the salad." As we worked side by side, I felt this easy camaraderie between us. No pretenses, no expectations, just two people enjoying each other's company. Over dinner, we talked about everything and nothing. He told me about a trip he'd taken to Spain years ago, how the food and the colors had stayed with him. I shared stories from growing up in a small town, about the awkwardness of being the different kid. When the plates were cleared and the wine bottle was half empty, Jake reached across the table and took my hand. "You know," he said softly, "I've been thinking about how crazy it is that we met over something as silly as mirror selfies." I laughed. Yeah, who'd have thought a guy taking selfies in a locker room would end up being one of the most important people in my life? He smiled, and for a moment, everything else just faded away. I don't want to rush anything, but I feel like what we have is something real, and I want to see where it goes. I squeezed his hand, feeling that same flutter of hope and excitement. Me too. The weeks that followed were some of the best I'd ever had. We fell into this comfortable routine: morning texts, post-workout coffee, lazy Sunday brunches. But there were also moments of vulnerability, like the time Jake opened up about some of the struggles he'd faced with past relationships, or when I shared my own fears about being truly seen. Those conversations weren't always easy, but they made us closer. They made me realize that love isn't just about the good times. It's about being willing to face the messy, complicated parts together. One night, after a particularly brutal workout, we found ourselves back in the locker room. The gym was nearly empty, and the silence felt almost sacred. Jake looked at me in the mirror, his eyes soft and serious. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course," I replied, heart pounding. "Where do you see yourself in, say, 5 years? I mean, with me?" His voice was tentative, like he was afraid of the answer. I took a deep breath. Honestly, I hadn't thought that far ahead, but looking at him, I knew I wanted to try. "In 5 years," I said slowly, "I want to be with someone who gets me. The good, the bad, everything. Someone I can laugh with, fight with, and grow with." And right now, that someone feels a lot like you. His smile was radiant, and he leaned in to kiss me, soft, slow, and full of promise. After that night, I started thinking about how far we'd come from those first awkward mirror selfies. It wasn't just about gym routines or casual chats anymore. It was about building something real, something lasting. And while I don't know exactly what the future holds, one thing's for sure, I'm not walking this path alone. Not anymore. It wasn't a grand gesture or some perfectly scripted moment that made me realize how much Jake had become a part of my life. It was a quiet evening, just the two of us sitting on his couch after a long day, our legs tangled up together, the TV murmuring softly in the background. I caught him watching me, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that felt full of warmth and something deeper. I smiled, nudging his shoulder gently. You know, it's funny how all this started with a guy taking mirror selfies in a locker room. He laughed softly and shifted closer. Yeah. Who'd have thought a dumb selfie session would lead to this? This, I said, looking around at the cozy apartment, the scattered books, the little plants he'd nurtured in the sunlight. Feels like home. Jake's fingers traced small circles on my arm, and I realized then that home isn't a place, it's a person. It's the quiet moments, the shared laughs, the conversations in the middle of the night when the world feels too heavy. We'd come a long way from awkward greetings and fumbling through workouts. We'd built trust, found comfort in each other's imperfections, and created a space where we could be exactly who we were. No masks, no pretenses. That night, as I rested my head on Jake's shoulder, I thought about how unexpected love can be. How sometimes it sneaks up on you in the middle of a noisy locker room, or in the echo of clanking weights, or through a series of awkward texts and unplanned hikes. And how, when it feels right, it doesn't need fireworks or grand declarations. It just is. We didn't have answers to all the questions about the future, and that was okay. What mattered was knowing we'd face it together. As the city lights flickered outside the window and the world settled into quiet, I felt a deep sense of contentment, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was exactly where I was meant to be. With Jake beside me, mirror selfies and all, I was finally home.